Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our seventh webinar in our series, The Hardware Marathon. We are looking at the phases and some of the obstacles encountered in developing a hardware product. In the previous episodes, we've looked at how to utilize iterations to your advantage, the importance of using the physical representation to communicate the vision of your product, several tools to protect your intellectual property, elements to consider in developing your minimum viable product, and then how to transform that MVP into a manufacturing ready product. In our last episode, we looked at wrapping up the design activities and starting production with tooling for plastics. You can find these on our YouTube channel if you weren't able to join us. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss contract manufacturing for the pilot build. In many ways, everything that we've discussed in this series is leading up to this point. For those who haven't attended, my name is Jenney Loper. I'm the Director of Operations at Zebulon Solutions. I've been in manufacturing since the age of 6, working in my father's machine shop, and after completing my degree in physics, I've held positions in every aspect of developing a product, from research to design to testing and scaling production to over 40,000 units per month. Most of my career has been working with a product after it has been designed, and I have over 2 decades of experience in manufacturing, quality, and supply chain management. In my current role, I have a lot of conversations with people developing their first product, which was really the basis for creating this webinar series. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Teresa Neely. She's the supply chain manager here at Zebulon Solutions. Teresa, welcome. Would you introduce yourself to our audience today?
Thank you, Jenney. Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa Neely. I currently serve as the supply chain manager at Zebulon Solutions. With over 20 years in Tier 1 electromechanical manufacturing, I began my career specializing in new product introduction. This role exposed me to the complexities of supply chain management, manufacturing processes, and rigorous inventory control. Throughout my career, I've managed product transfers, sourced and qualified suppliers, both domestically and internationally, and developed strong relationships across various industries, including injection molding, printed circuit boards, metal fabrication, and system integration. My expertise also extends to managing inventory risk and leading demand planning efforts for contract manufacturers and customers. I'm thrilled to be here today. I look forward to sharing insights with you.
I'm glad to have you join me as well, especially given your previous experience with a Tier 1 contract manufacturer. You bring a lot of insights to what happens behind the scenes. But before we get into our discussion, I want to start off with just a couple definitions of terms. We run the risk of using terms and words that may not be familiar to our audience. So let's first talk about what I'll just say CMs are, and CMs being contract manufacturing is our first term for the day. But would you mind telling our audience what the difference is between a CM and a parts distributor, as well as a custom part fabricator?
Sure. Contract manufacturers, CMs, do the work. They buy the parts from the distributors and the fabricators to assemble the products for you. Part distributors and custom component fabricators sell the parts you need to the contract manufacturers. It's always good to build a solid relationship with all of them if you can.
Yeah, I think we'll get into that a little bit later. One thing I was thinking about, one of the differences was also around contracts. That with contract manufacturers, you usually have contracts. And you might even have them with your parts distributors, but I don't know. Do you have contracts with your custom part fabricators?
I would say no to the custom fabricators, but to the part distributors, you may set up a contract with them to get a special buy or a price that's just for you as their customer.
Right, you can negotiate. You can really lock in
the price.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. Well, what kind of things do CMs make in comparison?
So most contract manufacturers are equipped to, assemble both electronic and mechanical hardware products. This can range from assembling just a printed circuit board to creating a complex box, assembly, which might include mechanical components such as metal or the plastic parts, cables, and sometimes electronics. We're going to talk more about what a box is.
Yeah,
right. The scope of their services can vary depending on the product requirements.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that because we'll use probably the term boards and boxes throughout this conversation, and boards talking are really those printed circuit boards,
Mhm.
and boxes are really anything mechanical. So finished system, it could just be a little box enclosure that holds the electronics. It could be, I mean, really anything that's a box is a finished good.
Right.
So, yeah. We should say we're having some problem with the air here. We've got the smoke in the area from a wildfire, so we're both having some voice issues. But anyway, bear with us as we go through this. So what things don't CMs do?
Um, so while some contract manufacturers might employ engineers, these professionals are generally focused on process or quality rather than the product design. So when your product reaches that pilot stage, it's crucial to provide detailed documentation for the prototype build. This includes like having your bill of materials, BOM, assembly instructions, testing protocols, all prepared in advance to ensure a smooth production.
Yeah, you said bill of materials or BOM. We'll frequently just say BOM, and we're not trying to blow anything up.
Yeah.
We're just
That's one of those other acronyms
It
Jenney was
is.
talking about.
That's right. All right. What kind of companies utilize CMs typically?
Companies that utilize the contract manufacturers typically fall into two categories: those with products that need to be built but lack the in-house capability to manage that production, and those that initially attempted to manufacture their products internally but found that they lacked the resources to effectively handle the daily operations like manufacturing activities like inventory management, planning, purchasing, all those types of things. Contract manufacturers provide a valuable solution for these companies by handling those types of complex tasks and ensuring efficient production.
Yeah, so I think that it's really important to note that the contract manufacturers are really experts in all the things related to operations. So parts and planning, all of those parts, working out the details of training operators and all the HR stuff, which for startup companies, that's just a lot to take on in setting up an entire factory.
Well, yeah, you have to know how to set up the assembly line so
Right.
you get the best efficiency as far as labor in creating the product. So it's time. And time is money. So if you don't have it set up properly, it's going to cost you.
Indeed. Right. Well, so getting into our topics today, we're going to look at three different areas. One is the final preparations that need to happen before the pilot can start. We're going to take a look at the process at the contract manufacturer before they start building. And then lastly, just a short word of warning, really about what the current landscape is at contract manufacturers and how lean they're running in their operations. And this does have an impact out on the customer, which can be concerning, but we'll get into that towards the end. For our audience, we would love to have you engage with us during this event. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to post them in the LinkedIn window. They'll actually post in LinkedIn and then also show up here in the webinar so that we'll see them. We will pause after each section for questions, but if a question comes up during our conversation, go ahead and ask it. We'll try and wrap our discussion into answering your questions as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get into our first section. While much of what we discussed in the previous webinars have led up to this moment in product development process, let's discuss how to have the contract manufacturer involved really before it's their turn to build the product for the very first time. So going back to our last webinar, where we were talking about beta, when we would have selected a contract manufacturer, which we covered on the previous blog, in what ways do you recommend the CM being involved in the design process?
I think at this stage, involving the contract manufacturer is crucial for optimizing the production. They can provide and will provide valuable feedback on assembly design, manufacturability, and efficiency, and reducing the labor-intensive areas, kind of what we were just talking about. They can also leverage their relationships with their preferred distributors and the custom fabricators that we talked about earlier to offer you a cost savings opportunity for your components.
Go ahead, sorry.
Got a question?
No.
Their involvement helps in identifying potential quality and supplier issues early, which is important, contributing to a more efficient and cost-effective production process for you.
Yeah, so I think that one thing that we have when a lot of people come to us because they want help finding contract manufacturers is we'll take a look at their design files and be like, oh, we are so not ready for manufacturing at this point. So I think, being able to, we're not waiting until this stage to engage with the contract manufacturer can certainly make sure that the design is headed towards manufacturability.
Yeah, and it helps give them familiarity, say that right, with your product, and they're already thinking about ways to set up the line and assembly line to make it more efficient for you. So it's a win-win if you could do it as early as you can, as possible.
But not too early, because I know
not too early.
There's a sweet spot.
You gotta have a nice design, yeah.
Yes.
Documentation and stuff, yeah.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about what we see the concerns are. If somebody has a design and they're like, all I've got to do is just find a contract manufacturer and I'm good to go, and they just basically drop that design ready or not really ready for manufacturing, what's the concern about that?
Yeah, so one of the major concerns is not all contract manufacturers have the resources to thoroughly review and assess the manufacturability of your design, of your product, and they may proceed with production based on what you gave them. And if it's flawed, you're probably going to have a product that has functionality issues, it's got quality issues, and it's just not a good thing. Contract manufacturers typically prefer to receive comprehensive documentation, a gold sample, so a product that you have that works and functions like you want it to and cosmetically looks like you want it to. And then we always push for this detailed testing procedures.
Right. I think that gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah, it does. This allows them to produce the product efficiently and accurately, and then ensuring both high quality and profitability for you as well.
Right. I think that's it's a common perception among people who are not really involved in manufacturing, that the contract manufacturers will just take whatever gets sent their direction, and they've got the design engineers, and they've got engineers on staff that can just finish off the design, and it doesn't need much more, so it's ready to go to production.
Yeah, usually no.
Right.
I mean, like I said, they have engineers, and they'll look through it, and they'll go, and they'll make notes or comments to you how you can tweak this and tweak that, but for assembly, not necessarily for the design itself to function or get a quality product.
Right, because they're really focused on how it's going to get
built
put together.
Yeah, how it's going to get built.
Yeah, indeed. One question that I was thinking about is that how, if someone has never built a product before, how do they get that gold sample put together for their contract manufacturers?
Usually it comes from one of the stages that Jenney has talked about in the webinars earlier. You're going to have a well-defined, high-functioning or functionable prototype that has a cosmetic look and it functions like you want it, and it's been built properly, right? That's what we call a gold sample. Something that you want that contract manufacturer to look at. Sometimes they might take it apart too, but actually look at and go, oh, your documentation meets what we're seeing in the sample.
So they could use like one of the parts built for DBT.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, I just want to throw that out. I think that people might get concerned that, gold sample, if you've never been in production, how you're going to get there. Yeah. But the engineers can build it. They don't have to be out of the production line.
Yeah. You're likely going to have a gold sample before you go to production.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about testing for just a quick second. What kind of I think that we've talked a lot through this series about product testing and like through EBT and DBT. But when we're talking about going into production, we're talking about a different type of testing altogether. Do you want to comment on that, or?
So, testing is key, right? When that product comes off the assembly line, you as the customer, you want to know that it functions properly. It functions as you set it up to, right? So when it goes off to market, it goes out to your customers, it is working like it's supposed to be and intended. So that testing that's done at the end of the line. That's what we call
End
it.
of line
End
testing.
of line testing. For, let's say, the box, the final assembled box. That's key, right? That's going to not only let you know and feel confident that you're sending something out to your customers at work, but it's also going to help the CM know if it fails, what happened. And then they're going to go back, dial it back a little bit, relook at what they did to assemble it. Did they miss something? Was it documentation, a part, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then they won't sell you that part, meaning the CM's not going to sell you that part because it didn't function.
You don't want to pay for you don't want to pay for a bad part.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're going to keep building till they get the quantity that you asked for. And it's got to pass test. So very important.
But it's on the customer to provide that functional end of line testing, maybe working in conjunction with the CM to develop it. But
yes. I think for the box, the box build, I think the end of line functional test is mostly will come from you as the customer. You will define that protocol. If it's for the circuit board,
then they'll do
the CMs are very well. I mean, they have a lot of knowledge with that. They can probably build that up for you. But end of line test it's important.
It is. I think I so many projects kind of overlook that.
We like to stress that.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think that we've reached the end of this particular section. I see we have one question. Pardon while I lean in here. It says we have a customer or someone who says, I got sidetracked when you explained about CMs. Are those manufacturers overseas? Could be.
What was it? Sorry.
The question is, are the contract manufacturers overseas?
Are they manufacturers overseas?
Yeah,
well,
they could be.
It depends. Yeah. Here's the thing. When I do my matchmaking for the customer's product and the contract manufacturer, it all comes down to the revenue, the location, how complex the product is. If, say, you've got a retail part that you want to build, you're probably going to go overseas because that's going to get you the low.
If you got a consumer, if you got a high volume
like
consumer product,
retail type. High volume. Yeah. If it's a larger product, maybe more complex, maybe you're going to want to stay more on the domestic side here, Mexico, America, to build that for you because it might take a little extra handling, a little extra care on your part working with the CM to get it built. So it just depends on the cost that you want to pay.
Well, and I think also
and where you're in customer.
Where your
distribution.
Right. Yeah. And I think that for a lot of entrepreneurs starting overseas, there's just so much involved in a different culture, a different language, managing the time zone, and just the distance. And I mean, that's if you're trying to run a business here and bring up a manufacturing line, 10, 14 hours by plane overseas, it can be a lot. We do a lot of domestic sourcing, but we've done the international stuff.
We've worked a lot with overseas or international manufacturers, and you have to be there. I mean, if you're going to do it, you got to be there on the line, looking at the things coming off of the line, the products coming off the line, helping them tweak the documentation, answering questions real time. It's a process. So you just got to weigh your options, see what you want to do.
That's right. You got to know what those requirements are for sourcing. So All right, well, let's go ahead and move into our second section here. That working with a contract manufacturer is different from working with a parts distributor or ordering a tool for production that we talked about in our last webinar. But let's talk a little bit about how CMs take orders and then build. And there are the basics. There are two primary ways to communicate what you would like to order and then have delivered. Would you talk through what these two mechanisms are and how they're related to each other?
Yeah, so there's two common ways, right? There's the forecast or the PO. So
the PO being purchase order.
PO, another acronym.
I know,
sorry,
I get all the time.
Purchase order, so if a forecast is a prediction of your future demand for your products over a specific period of time, okay? It's typically based on your historical sales data, your market trends, and other relevant factors. Now, the purchase order, PO, it's a formal document, and it's sent to suppliers requesting the purchase of your parts, your components, your fabricated parts, those sort of things. And it details the price and the delivery terms and items like that. So purchase orders are used to place and confirm orders with suppliers and initiate the procurement process.
Right.
So those are the
So
most
POs
common.
and forecasts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was being distracted. I saw a comment from Ed about our loss, about how there's a concern about going overseas with the loss of IP, and so domestic is a good way to manage that. So
Oh yeah, very
But-
true. IP is a major concern for some folks.
anyway, talking about POs and forecasts, I'm
Yes.
just bouncing all over the place here today. I'm sure that our audience is probably more familiar with purchase orders. So let's talk about them first, and the process at the contract manufacturer. And so, as you said, that they are a formal document, which means them fairly contractual. I mean, they can be a legal document because you're asking them to go out and procure material. You're making agreements on shipping terms. You're making agreements on how many are going to be ordered and the time frame and what all of that. And so, if you decide to cancel the PO, they can be subject to cancellation charges. So, because it's a contractual document.
Yeah, for suppliers, and
Yeah.
then also, so if you're gonna set up your CO or CM on a purchase order type of service, if you will, there are some challenges to that, right? So the CM is going to want to quote every time you give them a PO or say, hey, I got a new order coming up. I'm going to need 400 of these in a couple months. That CM is going to want to requote everything for you. And then they're going to have to go out and look at the supply chain and see when the parts are available. They're going to have to see if the pricing changed.
And then they might come back and requote you if the pricing changed a lot.
Yeah, they'll
Yeah.
requote you if the price changed, period. And so it's a little different type of a way to set up your contract manufacturer. It's doable. You as a customer, you have to do a lot more management when you do that, right? So in your mind, you have to know what your longest lead time parts are. You have to know if any of those components have high risk of inventory availability. So you kind of have to know your parts and your lead times and your pricing, and you yourself have to manage that when you're on a PO-based contract with CM.
Because they don't have the visibility.
They don't have the visibility.
I mean,
it's not in their system. Now, if they know you and you've been working with them for 6 years, okay, they're probably going to know a little bit more.
Sure.
But
if you just drop a purchase order on them more or less cold, there's a whole lot of work that has to happen before they're gonna be able to manage it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you've got to have your own plan in place of when do I drop the PO to the CM because of this long lead time part, and then you have to go, oh no, that part's not even available. It happens, folks. It happens. And then you have to figure out what you're going to do to replace it because your CM's not going to help you with that because they had no visibility.
Right. They only know about the PO they got dropped. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier about involving your CM earlier in the design so that at least they can look at that bill of materials and maybe look that over and see what parts are going to be at risk for long lead delivery.
Yeah. I mean, it's very helpful in that to have them involved early on. But I'm just saying with the PO-based contract, like I've done this recently with customers. It's like every quarter we go out and we look at those parts that we know are low on inventory or have had problems in the past. And we look at them all the time before we even get the PO. Like, we're going to have parts available before we give the PO out. We're going to have parts available.
So that's how
it's a lot of management internally.
So you're doing all that work before you send the purchase order out.
Before you send the PO.
Yeah.
Because they're going to put the PO in their system and it's going to spit out, oh, this part's 52 weeks, a year.
Right.
We can't build this for you until
for another year. Right.
And you're like, no, I need this in 4 months.
Right.
So you got to do the work in advance.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, so once the contract manufacturer gets that purchase order, what happens on their side?
Yeah, so they're gonna take the PO. They're going to, well, first off, I should say, likely when you tell them you want to send them a PO, you're going to have an order for them. They're going to say, okay, wait, we need to requote.
Okay. So they're going to go through the quotation process.
So they're going to want to requote. So you're going to have to send them all your documentation, your board schematics, all box build, all of that stuff, the BOM, bill of material,
Yes.
and all of that, so they can requote. That takes a couple weeks.
Mhm.
Okay, then you get that back and you go, okay, here's my PO. It's got the
Mhm.
cost on it. They're going to load it into their system, and they're going to then start driving material against that PO with whatever contractual terms you have set up with them.
Mhm.
Some of them will require a 40% down payment on the inventory.
Things to be aware of. Yeah.
Yeah. So even though you're given a PO for $2 a part and you're building 500,000 of them, that comes to, they're going to want 40% of that.
Of that 500,000. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Or whatever the number is.
Yeah. And until you, in most cases, until you give the CM that money, they won't really push out any orders.
So they're not going to go buy.
parts.
They're not going to go buy material.
No, it's too
They're not
risky.
going to put you in the schedule.
It's too risky based on PO.
Yeah,
It's too risky, so they're going to ask you for a down payment first. So be prepared.
Have the money.
Open up your wallet.
Okay.
Your pocket.
Let's talk about forecasts for a minute. And this we wrap up this section. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs are hesitant to use forecasts, and maybe rightly so, because they don't know what their sales projections are going to be. They've done some market research, but until they have product to sell, they don't know what that reception is actually going to be. Yeah. And so they don't want to get locked into a delivery schedule that maybe they don't have the financial resources for, or they don't have the physical inventory warehouse space for. Yeah. So how does the ordering process change, though, if you do use a forecast? What are you able to mitigate some of that long lead material a little bit?
So like we talked about, the long lead time parts that may pop up here and there, and nobody knows about them. The forecast can guide the creation of those purchase orders. So in simple terms, they take your forecast, which are some numbers that you've given them on a monthly, like 200 a month or 2,000 a year, or whatever the number is, and they're going to put that into their system, their MRP system, and it's going to spit out to them, for lack of a better word, when those parts need to be ordered based on the lead time they have in their system. Okay.
So it's a way to give much more visibility to that CM about ordering parts.
Yes, and it's going to say, oh, you don't need this part for 4 weeks. I'll ping you again. Their system will ping them again when it gets closer to. So let me back up. When the delivery of your product is input into their system, and that's what you give them on the forecast, then that backs up to when they have to start placing their orders out to the suppliers.
In order to keep that delivery date.
Yeah, based on lead time.
Gotcha.
That makes sense. Yeah.
It does. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, we've kind of dove into a lot of stuff about POs and forecasts, but that's all right. If we have any questions, we can go ahead and take those here. I know these webinars are so short that we don't have time to get into every topic that we probably want to cover, but we'll save it up for next time. There'll be more webinars coming.
Tell us what you want to hear about.
That's right.
We'll come back.
But there's a lot, as we get into pilot, there's so many details that have to come together in order to really have a production. So not just the materials, you've got to have your assembly work instructions. We've talked about test procedures already and developing the test systems. And there's lots of little things that have to all work together. I think the other thing too is that you can't start really building your parts, your product, until all of the parts in house. And so if you have like a handful of parts that are not going to be due and not going to arrive for several months, you're delaying your entire build by that much.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
All right. I don't see any questions, so I think, am I not seeing any questions? Let's see there. All right. Well, we'll move on to the next section then. That's all right. All right. So we've titled this section Lean Manufacturing, which is really a misnomer. If you know what lean manufacturing is, then you'll get the irony here. But if you don't know what it is, it's really how to remove inefficiencies on the production line to improve throughput and reduce defects. It's usually a positive thing, but I think that what we're talking about here is more of a negative thing. In the last several years, you've seen a lot of changes happen at the CMs. We want to blame everything on COVID, but I think it was more of a perfect storm that was happening around COVID.
Yeah.
What were some of the other events that you saw that negative impacted the supply chain?
I mean, there were so many, but we'll list a few here for you. There were factories that were burned down.
And the number of factories, not just like one, like it was really bizarre.
It was like one a month. I mean,
Yeah, it was a really bizarre time.
it was kind of crazy.
Yep.
Like, why is that? Yeah, I don't know what's going on. But anyway, there were lots of factories, and these were factories for, like TI or that were selling components that would go on your printed circuit board, right? Critical components that you needed. Okay, factory burns down. Now you got to wait for them to get up and running again. Strikes, worker shortages, power outages. And then there was the container shortages, right? Remember all those?
I know.
Remember all the containers that were either stuck in the water or stuck on the dock because they didn't have any resources or trucks to move the containers, and nobody could get their material. It happened.
And then there were the trucks. There was this whole truck situation for a while.
Strikes and and then of course, if you were shipping to air, there were flights that were canceled. It was just like
it was a bizarre thing.
Perfect storm, if you could call it that was going on. And then of course the COVID hit, which really affected the supply chain.
And it was like all happening at the same time. And so, I mean, like 86 weeks kind of became the magic lead time for we have no idea when parts are available.
I mean, we saw parts not only go to a longer lead time, but to a higher cost.
Right.
Because of these things that have happened.
Supply and demand were
right.
Yep.
Yeah. Fires, they didn't have any parts. So if you could find those parts with other non-familiar suppliers or distributors, that was going to cost you 100 times.
Right. So we're coming out of that. We're coming out of that a little bit. I mean, we've seen lead times go back down that are reasonable, and the factories are coming back up, and we're not hearing so much about worker shortage and things like that. Things are recovering, but things at the contract manufacturers are still kind of behaving like they're not recovered exactly. Mm-hmm. What changes are you seeing that have gone on that are still continuing at the CMs?
Well, so I can tell you this, that resources for contract manufacturers, like the technical guys, the guys that work on the line, they are having a hard time keeping resources. Yeah. I have my own opinion.
So we'll have a beer afterwards. You can head her up for a beer, and we'll
so that's a huge restraint for them, right? If they don't have anybody on the line to build your product, you get product delays. And then that also plays into why the CMs are raising their prices, because they have to pay their people more.
Yep.
To hold
how that works. Yeah.
To retain them. Yep. There's also the problem parts, right? That they want, and these are the parts we were just talking about: the long lead times, limited stock availability. The CMs don't have resources for that, and they're going to throw that back on the customer to solve.
Well, I think it's also there's a lot more, because like back before all of this change happened, there were always problem parts, but it was like a handful of parts on a bill of material, right? It wasn't like during the really awful part of this, it was like every single part on the bill of material. I remember once you were chasing like 45 parts on a 50-part bomb or something, and so
chasing them not only to find the parts available, but then also try to get them at the lowest possible price. So you're not paying $50, maybe you're paying $5. Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot, and I think that has a negative impact then off on the customers. And if you're talking about entrepreneurs who don't have experience in going out and sourcing parts and how to figure out how to navigate that whole landscape, it can be really challenging for the entrepreneurs.
It's yes. I mean, the CMs are going to limit how long they hold the material for you, and so they're going to make you pay for any inventory that's sitting there that you haven't built out. Just because they can't manage those costs as they used to.
They're not being a bank anymore. They're just like, you've got to pay for the material that's here.
And with the limited resources, the lack of experience, missing business processes to hold and manage the inventory, that it's problems for the entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, there's a question from Ed. Thank you. Let's see. Do you think that with the good news related to the CHIPS and Science Act, I can almost read this, that we'll see a dearth of manufacturing related to skilled personnel? In terms of like coming to so I mean the CHIPS and the Science Act, that's bringing a lot of manufacturing to the States. I think that, I mean, that's certainly encouraging a lot more manufacturing. I know there was a question pop up on the screen. If that could get typed into the chat, then we'll catch it there. But I don't know how you want to try and answer Ed's question. I mean, I know that there are factories that are coming to the States, and that's hopefully going to encourage more people to be interested in going into manufacturing. I mean, as a whole, that's a whole challenge. That students who are coming out of school aren't necessarily thinking about going into manufacturing so much as they're thinking about going into technology, which is not the same as manufacturing.
Yeah. It's going to be hard, right? I mean, it's important that we all help somehow, some way, I don't know, to get folks interested in manufacturing, right? It's a lost skill.
It is
a lost breed, if you will.
Yeah. Let's see. In other words, not having high-level apprentice programs may hurt us in the long term. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's
of course, right? When people bring this up, instantly my brain goes to tool makers.
Yeah, absolutely, tool makers.
I call it a dying breed, right? And I'm hoping that the schools are getting enough students and teach them how to do this, because if we don't know how to make tools here,
we're going to lose the skill. I know. I mean, at one point,
it's going to cost us some money.
It is. It's going to cost us a lot. That's right. So,
and the tariffs, right? You got to remember too, if we can't start
getting
the resources here to build our product and do this, the tariffs, they just all went up 25-50%, depending on what the commodity is. That just happened this year. Wow, so a couple months ago, metal I think is up 50%. So
I mean, I think that there needs
components 25%.
It's one thing to raise tariffs, but I think it's also providing incentives into the educational system to provide not only educational opportunities, but also figuring out ways to attract students into those industries. I know that, and this is going back 10 years ago when I was at a domestic, a relatively old, they've been very established plastic injection molder up in the Midwest, and they were actually working in the high schools, like going and like paying students in high school to come work in their shop and basically go through apprentice programs because they were like, we're going to lose our workforce here within 20 years if we don't start investing. So
I think they're still doing that. I think the schools are doing a good job trying to get them in to the custom fabricators.
Yep. That's right. Yes, Ed. That's yes. We both know about tool making and machinist, and yes, that is what we're talking about. So, indeed.
So
well, that's right, Sherry. Well, I think we're over time here, so let's wrap things up today. I do want to open up the floor to our audience for any questions. That if you have anything else that you'd like to ask about. While we wait for people to type in questions, let's review some of the insights that we've shared. First of all, involve your contract manufacturing during beta to help them come up to speed quicker. Having a forecast can be a more efficient tool in managing long lead time parts, but it will increase the material exposure risk if you don't know how to manage that very well.
Yeah.
And then also just be aware that you're going to likely need to resolve parts problems. So I mean, it's been pushed off on the customer to have to solve these problems. So, all right. And am I looking for the questions in the right place? I don't. Oh, there we go. If the CM tracks material they own, why doesn't that CM track customer-owned inventory? Oh, we did mention that briefly, that the customers have to pay for the inventory. So,
if the CM tracks material they own, yes, they do. Why don't they track customer-owned inventory? Well, I mean, look, they do track it, but they've got to have something in their system to do it, right? So it's just how you get it set up. I think what we were saying earlier is that when you're on a PO-based contract with the manufacturer, it's not like they're gonna buy 400 parts to build your 400 boxes. Okay, there's usually a little bit of excess on that, especially on the board components, right? Not so much sheet metal
Sure.
plastics or
Right.
cables, but mostly on the board products. And that's the inventory that becomes excess. That's what they're going to make you buy if you don't have a forecast with them. And they have to wait, let's say, 4 to 6 months for another PO to come in. They're going to make you buy that inventory.
They're not going to just hold it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to. They're not going to hold it.
All right.
They may keep it in their cage for you, so you don't actually have to physically take it, but they want the money. They want the money to keep it.
Right.
And then they may charge you for overhead costs. It's
something to be aware of.
There's a lot to think about.
Yeah. As we're wrapping up, is there any insight that you want people to walk away with today?
Well, let's just say involve your CM at the appropriate time, right? During beta, as early as possible, and for sure once your design is stable, right? You don't just throw it over the wall like we talked about, because they're going to throw it back to you, and that's not going to be any good.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an important point. Stable, when the design is stable, because I think involving your CM when you're still iterating really fast and making a lot of changes, it's just going to annoy them and confuse them. And you're going to, you want to make sure that the design is slowed down. So during beta, DVT time period,
yeah, if you're still design, iterate, they will put the brakes on that fairly quickly if they figure out that's what you're doing.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, thanks for sharing that insight. And this really brings us to the end of our 7th webinar here in our Hardware Marathon series. Teresa, thanks so much for joining us today. There's so much information. We can do this again and probably talk for another hour.
I know. We could. Tell us what you want to hear. We'll do it again.
That's right. But we are also about to the end of our series. We only have one webinar left in this particular series, and that's going to be on stable production. I hope you will all be able to join us for that discussion. If you aren't on our mailing list about these webinars, please drop us a quick note in LinkedIn, and we'll get you added so that you'll be aware when the next one comes up. In parallel with this webinar series, we're also releasing blogs on each of the 7 phases, and they're out on our website and on our blog page. Today's topic is already posted at ZebulonSolutions.com. As I mentioned earlier, this video will end up on our YouTube channel, and if you'd like to get into contact with either myself or Teresa, feel free to do so through the Contact Us page on our website, or you can send us an email directly at info, that's INFO, at ZebulonSolutions.com, and just mention the webinar along with your question. Thank you all for joining us today, and we really hope that you'll be able to join us